Hi everybody. For this week I want to do two things. One is a quick review of basically all the things we've done up until this point, and that is to get you prepared as well as we can for our first quiz of the semester. And then the second thing I want to do is introduce the next unit that we're going to do after the quiz. And we're going to do that for probably the rest of the semester up to the midterm. Maybe even actually a little bit longer. It depends on how long we want to spend on this, but more on that in a bit. All right, first of all, we're going to have a quiz this week. Our first actual quiz. It's not just homework, but I do say quiz as opposed to a test or exam. So the point value of this falls somewhere in between those two. And the idea is it's meant to give you an opportunity to study, which helps you learn and practice. And it gives you a little pressure to try to pull all of these ideas together, make sure you understand them well enough, and make sure that you're able to do them, to create some of these arguments that we're doing. But at the same time, the stakes are a little bit lower than an exam. So if you're not quite ready or you don't do as well as you would like on this, it's not going to sink you. It's not going to crush your grade. You'll still be able to do just fine later on in the semester, no matter how it goes. So it's sort of a nice middle ground to ramp up for the semester. For the quiz, there will be no surprises whatsoever and no tricks. There'll be challenging problems, but those aren't new. We're going to have a section on argument recognition, just like you've had in your homework problems earlier, and they'll be recognizably similar. The same language, same author as the textbook, and so on. So nothing new there. You'll just have to determine what is and what is not an argument. And you'll remember that an argument is a collection of statements that work together to try to convince you, the reader, of some conclusion. They are often three statements where you have two premises trying to prove one conclusion, but they're not always that way. They might be a little more disguised. They might not be so neatly divided into three. And those are the tricky ones. And what you want to do there is try to determine first what the conclusion is. We've gone over conclusion indicators and premise indicators. So those give you a clue as to which part of the writing is the conclusion. You don't always have a conclusion indicator, but you might be able to add one. And that's part of your task, is to look for the indicators, but if they're not there, ask yourself, could I put one in? If you think the third statement, for example, is the conclusion, could I add a conclusion indicator like therefore or thus or something like that? And if you can add it in and it makes sense to you, then you have a pretty good idea that that might be the conclusion. Okay, so and then we're going to do the different parts of deductive reasoning. So you'll have I've already made this up, and now I forget exactly how it goes, but the questions will ask you to identify the different kinds of deductive reasoning, just like from your homework. And then in the last bit of the quiz, there's a section on validity and invalidity, and then also soundness and unsoundness. And it kind of goes in that order. So, and there'll be instructions in there, and you'll see. And if it's ever unclear, you can always look at the answers to see whether it's asking you to determine soundness or just validity. And it's laid out pretty straightforward. Okay, the best way to prepare for these is to go back and look at your homeworks to see, and at the chapter as well. So look at the homeworks and see which ones you have a good sense for and you feel confident about, and then look to see which ones you're less confident about, and then go back to the textbook to see what it can tell you about the things that you're not that confident about. If you don't fully understand a disjunctive syllogism, the either or, go back to the chapter in 1.3 and see if the language in there and some of the examples will help you have a sense for how those work. And you can also go through your homework and see the other examples of disjunctive syllogisms or whatever it is that you're having difficulty with, and look at that language. Part of what makes these types of problems hard is that they're all different. When they're just syllogisms, like 3 statements, they're pretty straightforward. But when they're in more ordinary language, they are harder to identify. And then it's much more up to you to figure out whether you have an either or an if then, or an all, none, or some. You have to ask yourself, could you put those words in and have them make sense, even if they're not there? Right? You don't want to get stuck on the absence of those words and say, well, I don't see all, none, or some, so this can't be a categorical syllogism. It's not true. You want to ask whether you could add them because they are implied. And that's how we talk about these. We don't, in our ordinary lives, we don't always use the words all or none. We just talk about elephants, for example. Maybe we don't talk about elephants. Maybe it's cars. When you say elephants or cars, the idea is that unless you specify that it's only some elephants, like Asian elephants, or some cars, like SUVs, the assumption is that you're talking about all cars and all elephants. If there is more specific language, like Asian elephants, then you're probably talking about all Asian elephants, and that's your category. Not all elephants to include African elephants, but still maybe your category is all Asian elephants. Okay, that's kind of how that works, right? It'll help you understand what your categories are if you look for things that limit the category. If you have no limits, the whole thing, like cars, is probably your category. All right, that's really it. The questions are, and the problems are really designed to be straightforward and not to be tricks. Now, because this one is for a sort of proper grade, if there are things in there that have the confusing ability to be read in different ways, then we can figure that out afterward and we can throw them out. I'm not interested in giving you trick questions, but these questions are so difficult to write in a way that they're only readable in one way that sometimes confusing questions sneak through. And they're published in the textbook, and even though they've been vetted and reviewed, it's very challenging because language is slippery in that way. So what we'll do is, if somebody wants to point out that one is just too weird, or you got it wrong, but it's right if you read it this way, I will always look at these, and I have no problem with throwing out questions that are confusing for whatever reason. It happens, I don't want to say it's common, but it does happen, and it's not a big deal. We'll fix it later. All right. That's really it for the review. No tricks, nothing new. Review the things we've done so far. You have everything you can possibly need to do well on this, so that's really it. Just make sure you have reviewed, make sure you're focused, and you're aware of the deadline and so on. Okay, that's it. That's the first part. That's your review. Okay, what I want to do now, starting, is sort of once you've done the quiz, and I do want you to do that first, so that you have all of this deductive stuff in your head, and you take the quiz, and you can do as well as you can. After that, what we'll do is move on to inductive reasoning. And you might even just pause the video now and go study and go take your quiz, and then come back to it here. We're at about 9.5 minutes, coming up on 10 minutes. Come back and hear the inductive stuff. Or just keep on chugging. It's up to you. I'm going to keep on chugging. Inductive reasoning is the much more realistic common, real-world sort of reasoning. Out of the two, you have deductive and inductive. That's what we're going to look at anyway. Inductive reasoning is it's the kind of stuff that you use every day. You hear it every day. You use this every day, even if you're unaware of it. Whereas the deductive stuff, it's very harsh. Not a lot of your regular language is as neat and as necessary as deductive reasoning. Where, I guess, in other words, what I'm saying is that the effectiveness of deductive reasoning comes from the fact that if your if your premises are true, then your conclusion is necessarily true, like it has to be true. The difference, and this is the key difference between deductive and inductive, with inductive reasoning, if your premises are true, your conclusion is probably true, or like most likely true. But there isn't that same necessity. There's no guarantee that it's true. You simply have good, strong reasons to think that it's true. And in real life, so to speak, in everyday language, ordinary language, this is really all you ever have. The inductive stuff, the probably true. So we're going to spend more time on this than we did before. That's sort of the basics of it. We'll do the analysis of this later. So where we had like validity and soundness, we're going to have strength and cogency for this section, but we're going to talk about that in a week or two. For now, what I want you to know is there are basically 6 main kinds of inductive reasoning. There are some more, but these are like the most common ones that you're going to recognize and that you're going to use most often in your actual life. The first is called an argument from prediction. And I'll tell you just a little bit about that now. The other is just so you know, and this is straight out of chapter 1.3, right here. So you'll just go back to 1.3 to read about the inductive stuff. We've already gone through the first half of this chapter and then skip to 1.4. So here's where you come back and get all this stuff. The other parts of beyond an argument from prediction, you have an argument from analogy, which you hear all the time. It's extremely common. You have a generalization, which is relatively common, also commonly used wrong, which we'll talk about later. You have an argument from authority, an argument based on signs, and you have a causal inference. And we're going to take each one of these one at a time over the next few weeks. So we'll go through somewhat slowly, making sure we have a good sense for how they work, like how to identify them, and then also how to create them. Because remember, the ultimate goal of all of this stuff is that you are able to create your own methods of persuasion through writing. And these are just like the methods for how to do that. Okay, so I'll just tell you about the prediction, because that's where we're going to start. An argument from prediction is where you use some knowledge, something true from the past, and you say that since it happened in the past, this thing did happen, I can guess that it will happen in the future, or that something will happen in the future. So you're turning to the past and pointing to something that is real, something that is true and confirmed, and then you make a prediction based on that. You say, that's my evidence. You say, since that happened, I think this is going to happen. Does it follow necessarily that this is going to happen? No. Right? You see the difference now? If you point to something reasonable, you have a conclusion that will probably follow. Like, I just saw it in the textbook, so it's on my mind. It's something like since all previous U.S. presidents have been over the age of 40, probably the next U.S. president will be over the age of 40. That's a prediction in that sense. And so what you're doing is pointing to this chain of events in the past that is true, and saying that since that's the way it was, it'll probably happen again. Now, obviously, somebody could be elected who's a little bit younger, right, within the legal limits, which is below 40. But you're saying that clearly the American public favors people who are older than 40 anyway. And there has been such a long case. I mean, literally, all the way back to the first president, there have been no exceptions. And so there isn't really any reason to think that it would be different in the future. So you can make a pretty good prediction about how that's going to go in the future. There aren't any guarantees, but you've got a good argument based on a prediction. Okay. That is probably it for now. I want to stop there. We're going to go through individually each of the rest of these one at a time. We'll do analogies next time and generalizations and so on. And we'll talk about how to do the analysis of these and determine their strength and their cogency later on. So for now, take your quiz this week, and then there'll be a homework assignment up for you to do some of this stuff. And that's it for now. As always, let me know if you have any questions, especially about the quiz, preferably before you take the quiz. And then about the inductive reasoning stuff. Once you switch gears and start thinking about this stuff, let me know if there's anything else I can say about it. You can reach me by phone or email, as always. And otherwise, good luck on the quiz. I will see you all next week.